I'm Karen Keith. Welcome to Evergreen Video Productions' presentation of Tulsa Treasures, the chainsaw art of Clayton Coss. Now, if you've been around the Tulsa, Oklahoma area for very long, I'm sure you've noticed all these sculptures done from old tree stumps around town in neighborhoods and at businesses. Well, one man, Clayton Coss, did nearly all of these sculptures. They're wood sculptures done entirely with a chainsaw. Now, this is an art form brought to Oklahoma for the first time by Clayton's father in the form of a promotional contest in Claremore. Now, coaxed into participating, Clayton Coss began a career as a chainsaw artist. Now, more than 14 years later, Coss has completed more than 1,000 of these carvings, most of which have been done in this area. Well, today we will take a look at a few of these carvings. In this presentation, Bill Henry of Evergreen Video Productions, in cooperation with Clayton Coss and his clients, has put together a series of these sculptures with the stories behind them. You'll hear from those who commissioned the sculptures and from Clayton himself. You'll see how these sculptures were conceived and turned into meaningful pieces of art.
Clayton, how did you get started doing chainsaw sculpture?
At that time, my father and, well, my mom and my dad both, they owned a hardware store in Claremore, Oklahoma. And my dad had always kind of had an eye for things that were a little different, you know, and doing things a little differently, and he saw somewhere he saw somebody doing some chainsaw carving. I believe it was up north. There wasn't any around here, none in Oklahoma or this part of the country, but he saw some being done, and so he decided as a promotional thing to promote a chainsaw wood carving contest in Claremore, Oklahoma, in conjunction at that time with, they had the Will Rogers days and this sort of thing, and so he promoted this contest. And the only problem with it was there wasn't anybody around here to be in the contest. And so he was searching for contestants, and and even brought some down from up in Minnesota, and that first year that he had that contest, I think there was only 4 contestants, and it was amazing. And at that time, believe me, the work was a lot more crude than it is now, but we were still amazed at what was carved with the chainsaw. It was just amazing, and everybody really thought it was a neat thing. And so, and I can remember him, that was the first year, and I remember him, you know, asking me to hand out the flyers and things for it, and I just, to myself, you know, I was just more embarrassed than anything. It was, what in the world can you carve with a chainsaw? And it was just, you know, such an odd thing, and it was just almost embarrassing. But after the contest, why, it was different. It was neat what they could carve, and I thought, you know, that would be neat. He had it the next year, and this time, in search of contestants, he asked me to be in the contest, and so I agreed to do it. And he had some saws, and I didn't have any saw. I'd never really run a chainsaw, and as far as that goes, it's a miracle I didn't seriously injure myself that first year I was in it, because it's a kind of a dangerous tool, especially in the hands of someone who's never run one before. So at any rate, I did enter, and he talked me into entering, and so they had a class for novices or whatever, which I entered, beginner sort of thing, and I won that, and kind of discovered I had a knack for shapes, three-dimensional shapes. Even though I didn't know anything about sculpture or art particularly, or even running a chainsaw, I still kind of had a knack for it, and so that's how I got really started. Get me now for it. Only time anybody wants to take my pictures when I look like I've been working all day. It was a great struggle, but it was certainly nothing I was interested in pursuing, you know, beyond that. I had other interests at that time. I was working as an industrial engineer at Rockwell, and of course I had my other interests and hobbies, plus I was, at that time I was trying to get into the military as a pilot, and but all the while I was doing a little bit of sculpture here and there, and got into a little show at, again, my dad had asked me to be in the Home and Garden show, and so I did that, and from that got a job in Tulsa carving out in Berry Hill, and ended up doing that, and that ended up getting in the Tulsa paper, and people began to call, and still it was in the secondary. I wanted to do other things, and So after after a while, I had a few of these things going, and the thing with the pilot didn't work out. I actually became a private pilot, but the military didn't want me as a pilot, so I thought, well, if I couldn't be a pilot in the military, and my job at Rockwell, frankly, was going to go away. I saw that coming. We built 100 of those B-1 bombers, and they were about done, and I figured that I was going to be going out the door. I said, well, if I can't make it get into the military as that, and I guess I'll just be a chainsaw wood carver. So basically I quit my job and made a deal with the people who ran the farm shopping center, and kind of set up there on the edge of the street, and here and there and wherever, and just went to work. And kind of been carving ever since, just taken off.
I always had this tree I planted 25 years ago when I moved to this property, and it got too tall, and I was afraid it would land on the neighbor's property in the house. So what should I do with it? I didn't want to cut it out. I kind of liked it and had some memories with it. And so I decided, so I got to thinking about Clayton. And I seen some of his work, and I said, why can't I come up with something and have him do it if he would like to? And so what should I do? I said, well, I decided it might be nice to have a statue of a blacksmith here out there, since more or less I've been a blacksmith all my life. People always wonder when they ask me, what do you do? I say, I'm a blacksmith. They look at me, I said, you don't look like a blacksmith. So then I explained to them when I first learned my trade in Germany at the age of 14, at that time as a machinist and tool and die maker. At that time, you didn't go to the hardware store and bought your tools, you had to make them. And that entailed forging. And so I learned all the fundamentals of forging, not thinking ever that I would ever be a blacksmith or do related work. So I had this little statue, which I have right here in my hand, and this would look about like it in my older years, which I would look like. And I said, so then I got to thinking, now then I got tree stumps, what can I do with it? So I noticed in my garden, I saw the little statue of a little gnome, and so I said, well, why not? The little people, they always played with fire underneath ground. You see them forging at other things, and I says, why not bring out the little men out there? We call it Heinzelmännchen in Germany. And so he had a hammer, so he asked me, he says, Mister, could I learn from you to become a blacksmith? And I said, why not? He said, I already have a hammer. I said, that's fine. So at that time, his little brother came out, and he says, well, I'm a little small, but I would like to watch too, and maybe I'd like to become a blacksmith. So that's why I got the idea, and I called Clayton and told him about my idea, and he liked it. And we proceeded to do it, and it was done very craftsmanlike. I was watching Clayton and as he working in there, and I was amazed at his talent as an artist, and get a perception by just looking at this small statue which I have here in my hand, and come out with such a wonderful thing. So I feel that it presents my business, which later I became a designer and blacksmith and fine wrought iron, doing business all over the world. And I enjoy it immensely, and so do my friends, and people come by and want to see it in the yard. And it's just a interesting piece of conversation. And I really enjoy it, and I think it kind of tells a story. In the background, I think you see a wrought iron gate, which is wrought iron gates, stairs, and it's been my livelihood, and we have done some of the finest jobs in the country. So I always feel good when I spend a lot of time in my garden. I love flowers, love nature, and that's how it came all about.
I will say this, it is certainly the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Absolutely. Even though I believe that I did have a little bit of a talent. If it was God-given, I thought, well, perhaps the Lord's felt sorry for me and give me something that I could do to make a living. But however you want to look at that, I did have a little bit of a talent or knack for the three-dimension, but at the same time, the difficulty and as hard as I struggled to make these things. People used to ask me when I first got started, you know, they would come up and say, well, can you carve, you know, such and such a thing, you know? And I always said, well, yeah. And not having ever carved anything like that, and only later to confront this log and have to deal with the situation, I can't count the times I've had to say, you know, to myself, what have I gotten myself into? But, you know, when I first started, I started carving bears, pretty simple. And then I got the idea I'd carve a pair of boots, cowboy boots, and I carved a pair of cowboy boots, and, you know, that went all right. I carved the left boot, but then you got to make the right boot. It's got to look pretty much the same except the other foot, and little things like that can throw you. But you know, at that time, I was, you know, I was a few little eagles, just little things, and so it was a tremendous thing to say, yeah, I'll carve this, I'll carve that, and then to have to tackle that. The learning curve that I went through was brutal as far as I'm concerned, and yet, and so that's how it happened, and I'm still learning. It still takes a lot of thought and a lot of work every carving. I try to give my best on every one of them. And so I'm probably rambling on too much. I think that's the end of the question.
This tree was one of our most prized possessions. It just provided an absolute panorama of color every fall. And we enjoyed it for 30-some years. But a cyclone came through and just topped it and left a few dangerous limbs on it. So rather than lose the whole essence of the tree, J. Jones decided to have this particular chainsaw sculpture done. And we had seen a particular work of Clayton's over, I believe, on 17th, just off of Denver, of Abraham Lincoln, or I believe. And so we contacted Clayton, and he came out with his wonderful array of equipment and started on this tree. And this is what Jay had chosen as what he wanted to have done, which is the soldier's hat or helmet and the gun and cross. And he sat here all day, and Clayton carved and cut and worked, and it was worth dollars worth of entertainment fees just to watch him. And he was here all day, and he just I went in and got this particular rifle for him to duplicate, and he did, and it just turned out to be the most marvelous chainsaw sculpture. We have people that accidentally wander up our road that come back again just to make sure they hadn't imagined what they saw the first time. And Clayton is just brings these things to life, and just lets you preserve a little of the things you wanted to keep.
Clayton, were you born with this gift, or did you learn it?
I think that I had some God-given ability that I built on. I think there's certain things that people have talents at. One person is good at one thing, another person might be naturally good at another, but being a natural talent in anything is never enough. Because I've put so much hard work into studying on my own, and each carving that I've done so many times, that it's never enough. It's something to start with, and I believe you have to have that. I mean, I've taught classes in this, and if somebody doesn't have something to start with, something to build on, it's very difficult to bring them along. But that there'll be other students that would catch on very quickly and have a knack for it. And if you've got something to build on, then yeah, you can go. But yet the road of learning about anything, the art and sculpture and composition, all these things are very important, and those are things I've learned and studied and still learning, and there's not a carving that I do that when I finish, or before I start, while I'm doing it, and when I'm finished and I'm all done, I'm thinking about how could I have made that better? How could I have configured those objects differently to make a better composition? How could this anatomy have been better? Where did I make mistakes? So it's a continual thing. I don't think you can ever stop learning. And so, yeah, I think it's God-given talent, but I also think it's a lot of hard work involved too.
We live in a beautiful section of Tulsa, Oklahoma called the Trees, and there are a lot of wild animals that live in this section that's very close to downtown Tulsa. We have lots of squirrels and bunnies, and have even seen a fox. And we have enjoyed this area very, very much. And I told my husband that if there was ever an opportunity for us to have a tree carving when one of the big elms in our area died, that I'd like very much to do that. And so in thinking of where we lived, it's like a small forest. And our last name is Bowman. So we came up with the idea of having Robin Hood as our sculptor because our last name is Bowman, and he was a great bowman. And we have enjoyed him very much. We have 3 children that go to college, and they said, "Mom, are you really going to do that? Don't you think that's kind of silly?" And I said, "No, I think it's great, and I think everybody that comes into this beautiful area will enjoy seeing Robin Hood, and he's guarding our small forest."
I think what's unique is that we've had several neighbors stop and look at Robin Hood and thank us for doing this for our neighborhood, which I think is very satisfying. I watched Clayton as he carved Robin Hood, and in fact I have some photographs of the progress sequentially from the big stump to the final beautiful work of art. And one of the unique things about Clayton and his process is that he works with a very small chainsaw. In fact, the chainsaw looks to be 6 or 8 inches long, and instead of carving the statue in the normal sense, he carves from the outside going in, which is a very unique process. And he did all this by memory. He never referred to a spec sheet or a drawing. He did do some research in the library about the height and other details of Robin Hood, but he came out here and did it totally by memory. And this is his unique product, and we're very happy to have it.
My name is Deborah Brown, and this is a sculpture that Clayton Coss did for us as a memorial to my son. He died when he was 6 years old. He was fascinated by frogs, so Clayton was able to incorporate this frog in. I'm fascinated by Victorian, and so he dressed the little boy in Victorian clothes. He is dressed like he's going to Sunday school, and he's found this frog And like all little boys, he has to stop and look. This is a very special memorial, and we're very proud of it. This is something that my son would have done. He wouldn't have wore the clothes, but he would have loved the frog.
When we are tackling the part where we're deciding what we're going to carve out of a stump or what can be carved, that is something that I usually work closely with my customers, the individuals who are commissioning me. But when I look at a stump and say we have some basic ideas, then in my mind I generally develop a basic composition of that sculpture. The arrangements of whatever figures we're carving, be it wildlife or human figures, or the configuration of the supporting elements, be it you're going to carve a little tree, and I try, and also where it sets in relation to, since this is a carving that, at least for the most part right now, can't be moved, it's a tree stump in the ground, and try to develop the best views for people, be it if they're going to see it from their back patio or from the roadway or from the sidewalk. And so develop the sculpture in my mind. I generally move things around and say, if I do it this way or this way. It also has, the tree has a lot to say about it. If it has certain shapes, forks, limbs, things like this, very important to utilize those, or to let the tree have its say. It's not good to go against the grain of what the tree wants, dictates because of its shape. So there are a lot of things, and yeah, so I build these things in my mind. Occasionally, if it's a very complex composition, I will sketch a little bit too, but for composition reasons only. So if I want to draw the viewer's eye to a certain place in the carving, it's very important how you put the pieces of the sculpture together, or how you arrange the objects. See, because what I try to do is lead the viewer. Lead the viewer, so when a viewer walks up there, I can tell you probably the first thing he'll see, and or the first thing they'll notice. A poorly composed sculpture is probably, believe me, I've made a few of them, but you don't try. You always try to do your best, but there's a distinct difference between a sculpture that is well thought out, well composed, as opposed to one that is thrown together. And the average viewer won't be able to tell you why, unless they happen to be a sculptor, an artist or something, but they'll walk up to the sculpture and then go, something's wrong with that. You know, and they couldn't tell you what's wrong, you see. But something's wrong. But if it's well done, it's in just the opposite sense of they'll want to look at it. When you get through with a sculpture and you want to look at it, you see, that's when you've gotten what that's what you're trying to get, you see. And so you know, that's the goal. You don't always hit the mark, but I have learned that you simply do the best you can, analyze it when you're done, and go on to the next one, because there's nothing you can do about it. It's not like we're doing this out of clay or wax. I mean, you can just cut the arm off and do it a different way here, or rearrange it here. You get one shot, that's it. You do the tree, and whether you made mistakes, all your mistakes are out there for everybody to see, okay? And either way, if you do well, then good. So that's the way that I view, at least in part, the sculpturing.
I'm Bill Pittman with the Bixby Optimist Club. I'd like to welcome you to the downtown Charlie Young Park in Bixby, Oklahoma. This park has been adopted by the Bixby Optimist Club, and we started a project in 1997 of doing some carvings out of some old pecan trees that were dying. And back of me are the first of the Charlie Young Park Ball Club. You can see the batter. This was done in '97 along with an outfielder. These carvings were done by noted wood carving sculpturist Clayton Coss. Later, the following year, we did 2 more carvings. One was a girl pitching a softball, and an outfielder that's looking up in the sky, which is very typical of the a young man playing ball. The next year we did the dog. Every ball club needs a dog, but the little girl pitching the ball was sort of unique in that we did that the year that the Bixby girls did won the state Class 5A softball tournament. Although the Bixby Optimist Club was the sponsor of the carvings, we had great support from our community. Citizen Security Bank and Trust Company is one of the major sponsors, along with other businesses and individuals. And we'd like to thank them for their contributions to making the carvings possible.
One stormy day, we had a maple tree in the front, it demolished by the storm. So I said, it was such a big tree, but yet we hate to discard it. Then a year ago, 2 or 3 years waiting. Then we heard about Mr. Coss. And then we talked to him. And then my husband and I, we also talked about it, what we can do. Then when we have contact with Mr. Coss, and I showed him about the statue I had in mind, and then this book I have discovered, which is my customer who has read it, and she has mentioned, go get the book. I said, oh, that's World War II movies. I forget it. She said, now go get it now, because that book is definitely just like you have been telling us. So lo and behold, I went to the library and I checked this book, Tenno-san. And then we kept looking and looking, started skimmed through, and it came to the picture of myself and my brother in my back. Mr. Coss also saw this. He said, could I do this? And he did not know how I carry the babies in my back, so I showed him how we carried it. This is what we did when we can help my parents and whatever. My father was not, he was at the war somewhere, he wasn't at home. So he was born in 1944. In 1945, the war came, that we were running around and chasing around, being in the caves and whatever. But my mother was smart enough to go around the circles so we don't get hurt. And then we got into the safe area as though American came every day because I was sick. He came every day to take care of me. That young man, that time, I was baby of course, sing a song, You're Only My Sunshine. I have never forgotten that word. I wish I knew who that person is, but here I am today in the United States. So the Lord has been blessed to me, whatever is a safe area. As though I've been in the United States in 35 years. And here I am residing in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Is it all done with a chainsaw, or do you really have some other special little tool that you use?
No, that's so common of a question, and a good question, but no, it is all done with a chainsaw. And I use several different sizes of saws, the smallest of which is a specially adapted bar for carving, but it's a little smaller at the end point, but other than that, it's a standard saw. But it is all done with the chainsaw, and and that's important to me. And now you can take that and do whatever you want with it. You could do. It's not a written rule or anywhere. It's just a personal angle that I take. Is that if you're gonna call it a chainsaw wood carving, then you need to do it with a chainsaw. And there's nothing wrong with taking a chainsaw carving and then taking air tools and chisels and things and making a very refined carving out of it. But don't call it a chainsaw carving. It's not. It's maybe a nice, elaborate, beautiful carving, but it's not a chainsaw carving, see? So what I do is strictly chainsaw carving. And maybe that doesn't mean a lot, but that's just the way that I look at it. If you're going to call something something, then that should be that, don't you think?
Mother's Day of 1996, we were sitting at the dinner table. All of the children were home, and I mentioned the fact that we were going to remove a large pecan tree that sits at the corner of the house because I was afraid that a limb might break off of it and fall into the house. And the kids seemed to be a bit alarmed about that, and I mentioned the fact that Juanita and I had discussed making carving out of it, and that we might get that fellow who does the chainsaw work to come out and carve it. The children became interested in what we might want to have carved there, and I mentioned that the bears and the eagles and all of the normal things that we'd seen around Tulsa, carvings that had been made by the person who did the chainsaw sculpturing. And finally, as a last resort, I mentioned the fact that we'd even considered doing Pistol Pete. And of course, having all of the kids that we had that had graduated from Oklahoma State University, why Pistol Pete really became a exciting thing to them. And we didn't think too much about it. And after a few days, well, we got a call from our oldest daughter, and she advised us not to do anything about it, that she had already contacted Clayton Coss, and that Clayton was going to come out and contact it. It was going to be my Father's Day and my Christmas present and my presents from now on. So Clayton came out in March of '97 and performed the carving. It took him 4 days to do it, and I watched him with a great deal of interest because I thought it was fascinating that one could take a chainsaw and could get the detail into the wood that Clayton was getting. And he had several different sizes of chainsaws with him, and the one that he did the real fine detail work had a saber on it that was about the size of your finger, and the little old chain went right around the end of it. And he just was really an artist with that, and just had a lot of fun watching him do it. And after we got it built, why, I was showing some pictures one time to some OSU people, and I didn't realize it then, but we were here at the house one day, and some cars came wheeling up, and out jumped some of the OSU pom-pom girls, and they were out oohing and aahing, and I got out to see what was going on, and they advised me that the real Pistol Pete was going to come in a few minutes, and as soon as he got here, they wanted to take some pictures because they wanted to use it in their spirit calendar for last year. So they showed up, and we had the real Pistol Pete and the wooden Pistol Pete all together at one time with the pom-pom girls, and they also, when they published their calendar for the year, why, they had a full-page picture in the calendar of Pistol Pete.
When we moved in, there was a beautiful old pine tree here that we just fell in love with. It's a huge tree. Unfortunately, it got pinewood nematodes in it, killed the tree, and we were trying to decide whether to take it out or replace it with something else. We decided to have a mama bear carved. We had some baby bears carved out back, so we decided to have a mama bear carved out front. An interesting story about that. After we had the carving done, it probably wasn't 2 weeks later, we had a couple come by, a woman and her mother. It turns out that the mother had built this house back in the 50s, and this tree was their first Christmas tree. They had bought a live tree and brought it out and planted it, and it just grew into a beautiful tree. We felt like that was really kind of neat that we could do something with that first Christmas tree that belonged in this house.
We were looking for a subject to make a carving of, and actually make a sculpture. And I'd heard so much about Clayton and his work, and we got together and he said, "What are you thinking about?" I said, "Well, I like to do somebody that's really an Oklahoman." We talked about Will Rogers, and I do a lot of business with John Starks, and we were talking about him. And I said, "But you know, Mantle had just passed away." I said, "What a wonderful thing to honor him." I have a relationship over the years. My dad worked for the newspaper in New Orleans, and I met Mickey Mantle in 1958 personally, and we lived in Dallas and came across him quite a few times, and again at the golf tournament. So he was a boyhood idol of mine, and I think next to Babe Ruth, probably the greatest baseball player for talent ever to live. So we have quite a bit of Mantle memorabilia, and I thought that we could not only honor him, but give a little something back, as people would enjoy seeing it. Well, Clayton told us it was going to be all out of the same tree. And for all of the time he did it, and it took him a year, he would never let us see it. He'd show us Polaroid pictures from the time. And the interesting part about the sculpture itself is the bat. He called the Hall of Fame and called Louisville Slugger, and they actually gave him the dimensions of the Mantle bat. And the only thing on there that is machined is the bat itself. Frank Charles, who played for the Drillers, was working for us at the time, and when they brought the sculpture in, he picked up the bat and said that you could actually go and play a professional baseball game with that bat and hit the ball out of the stadium, and the bat would never crack because it was machined that well. So people have come to see it, people come to get their picture taken with it, and we're just extremely proud of not only the statue, but how Clayton has done it. And if you'll notice the statue itself, even the shoes are down to the exact type of spikes that was worn back in the 50s and the 60s. So we're real proud to have it, and we're we're even more proud that Clayton has refused to do any other shots of Mantle. As a matter of fact, some other people have asked to do it, and he said, no, my Mickey Mantle is that crown, and we're really proud of that, and hopefully we're going to get him to do another one real soon.
The Vietnam veteran carving was a very significant carving in a lot of ways, and that is one of my fondest memories. And it was a great struggle, a great challenge for me. At that time, I'd only been carving. I mean, from start from the very time I picked up a saw to the time that I did that carving was only a little more than, or right around about a year. And so here I was, inside of a year, starting to tackle a 12-foot tall carving of an American combat soldier with an M16, hand grenades, and ammo pouches, and all this huge project for me. And that even today, 15 years later, or however many years it's been, it'd be pretty good project. But the significance of it really was, it was a turning point. It was at that time I had quit the full-time job and began carving, and I really believed that what I had as a product, as the sculptures, was a good thing. It was neat. The people who saw it were excited about it, but I had no way of promoting that sort of thing, and so business was slow, to say the least. And as much as you might like something, if you're not putting food on the table, it doesn't do you a lot of good. So business was slow, and what was going to happen was I was going to have to hang it up and say, well, I gave it a good try, but it didn't work out, and get a real job, I guess, so to speak. But I had seen this tree stump, huge oak tree stump out in front of the Vietnam Veterans Counseling Center, and it was quite tall, but topped out. It was just the stump. It was dead. They hadn't taken the stump out because of expense and this sort of thing, and so I had always been in my mind that tree was there. I'd seen it. Nancy and I, my wife, we had seen it. So I thought, you know, if I'm going to go out, I would like to do something for the veterans. Perhaps I could carve a soldier and, you know, just donate it, and then that would be it, and I would get another job and just forget about the whole thing. And so I went down there and talked to the director, Jim Howarth, at that time. And of course, he was very nice about it, and but they had no money, but I didn't expect him. I asked, well, you know, let's just do it, you know. And so he got excited about it. The tree was still a little bit too tall. We didn't have any money. We got another landscape service in Tulsa, Bruce. They came down, donated their time, their efforts, and brought it down to the height where we could handle it, which was about 12 feet total, I think. And so we put together an idea, and there was some veterans that would come into the counseling center, and from one of those we got a model, and we got some gear, and we got a rifle and all this, and proceeded to do this carving. And it was really surprising because it began to draw attention, and as the thing took shape, it was just like a big snowball, and it ended up being a big event. And the veterans, they would come out, and the Vietnam veterans, you know, which is it's not something that they'll talk to anybody about their experiences, you know, but it meant a lot to me, you know, that they would, how should I say, kind of open up to me and share their experiences, and you know, they gave me a lot of memorable things, you know, with the hat, the bush hat, and the different pins, and their units and things they served in, and they just kind of accepted me as one of them, you know, so it was very meaningful. You know, I was trying to say to the veterans is, hey, I'm trying to thank you. You don't have to thank me. You're the one that went to war. I'm trying to thank you. You don't have to thank me. Yet they insisted on doing that, and so we had quite a relationship based on that. You know, after that carving, that particular carving, you know, I was getting ready to hang it up, but that really jump-started the business, you know, and I didn't go into it for that. I didn't go into it for publicity stunts, you know. I just wanted to do something for them and say, that's it. But it turned out good for everybody, and it ended up jump-starting the business for me, you know. I got some work, and from that point on, you know, we've been rolling.
We've lived in this house about 23 years. We've raised all of our children here. And as you can see, we did have a wonderful red oak tree that was very close to our house. And we loved it. It was wonderful. And it reached up to way past the top of the house. And our daughter's bedroom, there's a window. And we always said if there was a fire, one thing, she could open her window and she could jump into that tree. It was so wonderful. And as the years passed, we lost the tree, and it was so sad. We lost several in our yard, but that one really hurt the most. And we had heard of Clayton Coss, and we had seen some of his work. And so we thought this would be the time to try and save and make something of the wonderful tree we had. Our children were all grown at the time. So we asked Clayton to come over, and he saw the tree and he said yes, he could do something with it. And then we had to start and think about what we wanted to do. And since it was a time in our lives when our children had left home, we thought that a child seemed good to us, but we didn't know what age. We didn't know a boy or a girl. We didn't know what to do. We didn't know what kind of symbol we wanted with the child. So as time went on, Clayton was busy, and he came back, and we talked several times. And we finally decided that we would do a child, and we're flag wavers. We always have had an American flag in front of the house. And so Clayton suggested that maybe we could have a functional piece of art and have a child holding the American flag. And my husband and I just loved the idea, and our children did too. So we said, that's a go. We wanted that very much, and we were real excited about it. Clayton and I talked about and decided on what the piece would look like. It was going to take him a couple of months before he was able to actually start on this sculpture. And in the meantime, he planned on starting in May. And of course, in April, in Oklahoma City, we had the tragedy of the bombing. And as Clayton started working on the piece, the symbolism for this piece was added, that it reminded us also of the children and of the bombing. And when he hung the flag, even the neighbors had mentioned that was something that they thought of also. And so, thinking with the children and having a friend that taught in kindergarten, I had really two friends that taught in the same kindergarten class. We invited the kindergarten class to come over and watch Clayton do this piece. He did the rough work in one day, and then the next day we had the class come over. They had lunch in the front yard, tables put out. We used red, white, and blue as the theme. It was part of their art class. They were doing a study of all the famous artists. And come to find out, after the study was over, Clayton Coss was the most famous artist, far above Michelangelo and Matisse and Rembrandt and all the others they studied. Clayton Coss is the one they really knew the most about. It flies every day, and as you can see, it's when you turn the corner and come home, it's the first thing we see, and we love it very much.
Well, our great statue adventure really started when my wife went to Tulsa to visit her aunt, and her aunt drove her around Tulsa looking at statues that had been carved from trees by Clayton Coss. And my wife was fascinated by it, and then she later bought a pictorial book that he had put out, and we were just amazed at some of the tree carvings he had. And shortly after that, we lost a big hackberry tree right on the edge of our property on Main Street here in Norman. And so we decided we'd have him carve some kind of a statue out of that tree trunk. We'd seen some of Abraham Lincoln in his book that was very good, and bears and children and Sherlock Holmes. They were all very good. And then suddenly I remembered about my great-grandfather who had died in the Civil War, and boy, that just clicked. And so I decided to have that statue of my great-grandfather carved. And so about 6 months later, Clayton came down here and worked on it, and it took him 4 days to do the carving, in spite of a lot of interruptions like 3 newspapers and 2 TV stations. And while he was working, particularly in the evenings, there would be 30, 40 people out there viewing his carving efforts. And cars on Main Street would all slow down, and some would even stop momentarily to see what he was doing there. Before the carving was even finished, when he first started on it, a gentleman came by and said he recognized the head of a Civil War soldier, and asked if that's what it was going to be, and he said yes. So he went home. He was a Civil War reenactor, and he went home and got his uniform on, which is very authentic. And Clayton took a lot of measurements of the thing and made sure he had reproduced everything that he had in his uniform. So the statue is an exact reproduction of really what a Union Civil War soldier wore. After the statue was completed, Tom asked if he could have his 10th Kansas Reenactment Regiment come down and dedicate the statue, which they did. About 8 or 9 members of his regiment came down there, and we had a crowd of about 100 people, 2/3 of which were children, to see the reenactment. So that was quite pleasing. My great-grandfather, Patrick McGuire, immigrated to the United States with my grandfather in the early 1850s. It was a result, of course, of the Irish potato famine. We speculated that my great-grandmother died, and my great-grandfather, being an illiterate Irish immigrant, couldn't raise the children by himself. Nobody to take care of them in the daytime, so they had to put him in an orphan's home, which was very typical of that day and age. And I guess he just upped and joined the Army, and at 35 years of age. And then 2 years later, he died of in the Memphis hospital of disease in Memphis, Tennessee.
My name is Artis Manning. I'm a docent here at the Tulsa Zoo. A docent is a volunteer job where we teach those who are zoo visitors and also organizations and schools. We give them an insight to the animals that we have. I am delighted to be able to share with you the story behind the sculpture that you see in the background. In February of 1995, I met here with Clayton Coss to discuss a possible sculpture. I had for a long time wanted to honor the memory of my father, who really taught me a lot about nature. When we met, the only thing I was familiar with was Clayton's sculptures of animals that I had seen throughout town. And I asked him if he could sculpt an animal in memory of my father. And he measured the tree and said, "This is a wonderful tree. What animal do you want?" And I said, "You are the artist. You tell me what you would like to do." And he then asked me to tell him more about why I wanted to do it. And I told him how important my father had been in nurturing a love of nature in me as a very young child, in teaching me that animals were important. And so we had lunch, and after lunch the director of Zoo Friends said, "What have you decided?" And Clayton, I'll never forget, he looked out over the zoo and he said, "There are plenty of animals here at the zoo already. I really don't think I want to do an animal. I believe I'd rather do a father and daughter. And perhaps looking up into the trees as an owl would be up in the tree." Well, I was immediately delighted. It sounded like a wonderful idea, and so was the director of the Zoo Friends. And we decided that's what it would be. And later on, I got to thinking, if he's going to do the father and daughter, could he make it look like my dad? And I asked him, and he said, "Certainly, bring me a picture." And I brought a picture of my dad holding me in the very same position that you see in the sculpture when I was 4 years old on my 4th birthday. And coincidentally, Clayton's daughter was about the same age as I was in the sculpture. So combining that picture and the picture he had his wife take of he and his then 3-year-old daughter, Katie, so that he could get the perspective from all angles, that is how those were the things he used in carving the sculpture. It took him 8 days. It was completed in March of 1995, and it was a wonderful experience working with him. We often talked about what we hoped the message would be as people came to the zoo and viewed the sculpture. The message we wanted to send was that the love of nature is passed from one generation to another, and we hope that the sculpture would send that message. That there is a quotation that is on the sculpture that says, "In the end, we will conserve only what we love. We will love only what we understand, and we understand what we are taught." And that is the essence of what I believe is important. The title of the sculpture is "The Gift." It honors the gift of love of nature that my father gave to me as a child, and now that I am retired from the job that I had for a long time as counselor in Tulsa Public Schools, I now am able to give back to the visitors of the zoo and share this love with them.
This is a carving of our Alaska Malamute Cody that died a year ago in October. We had this tree that had died, and we didn't want to just cut the tree down without having Clayton carve something on for us. And we decided to have Cody carved in there. He was very wolf-like. We have coyotes in this area that howl at night, and then he would howl, so this was very appropriate for the area. But as you can see, Clayton did an excellent job on it, and we're real pleased with it.
We lost this great big old wonderful tree during the construction of our house in 1991. So in the summer of 1992, we commissioned Clayton to come out and work with us on a plan for a tree sculpture. He had done one for us previously, and we knew this is what we wanted from this tree. Our only input to Clayton was that we hoped to incorporate our three sons in the sculpture and maybe portray some of their interest. He already had ideas of shape and form, and this was something different from many of his other pieces. He was not going to be able to get around to it until towards the end of that year, and it was actually in November then when he began. And during that time frame, we lost my mother-in-law to cancer. He was actually working on the sculpture the day of her funeral in the cold and the wind and the rain. He finished it about 3 days later, and it only seemed fitting because of the time frame that we would have this sculpture as a memorial to her. So we talked to Clayton, and on the back of the tree there's an inscription of her name, Meemaw, which is what our boys called her, the year, and an angel. She collected angels, so this seemed to be a fitting symbol. And we can see this inscription from inside our house, and it's been a great comfort and joy to us.
When the tree out front of my orthodontic office died, we decided we wanted to do something that would represent the office but not be commercial in nature. Therefore, we looked for something that would have a warm, caring feeling, and that's when we selected from a book of bronzes, the one that has a boy with a girl on his back. It's really from a French story in which a boy and girl were lost in the woods and came across a stream. The boy carries the girl across the stream on his back. The little dog is actually a memorial to our poodle that had died just before Clayton had done the sculpture. And he went ahead and put the red bows in, which were really representative of her. We've really enjoyed having the sculpture, and it really gives the feeling that we want for our office and that represents our office. With the office being on Harvard, it has given an opportunity for a lot of people to drive by and see the sculpture. And we even received a card from a woman who drove by and just thanked us for doing the sculpture. So it's been very positive for everyone and all of Tulsa actually to see it.
Several years ago, when my wife and I decided to build our new home, we wanted to do something a little bit different and unique in the backyard. And since I publish a national golf magazine, we decided that the putting green was an ideal choice, both in terms of uniqueness as well as in terms of maintenance. And we built the putting green and moved into the house, and a year later, one of the oak trees that kind of shaded the putting green, with a 7,500-year-old oak tree, died. And naturally we were heart sick, but we decided to try to make lemon out of lemonade, and contacted Clayton Coss to come out and do a chainsaw sculpture and turn that 100-year oak tree into this beautiful sculpture of the golfer. And so we feel like we can replant trees, they'll regrow, but we've got something now of lasting beauty that will really enhance the backyard.
I think that my work will obviously be remembered as a reflection, as far as it's remembered, I think it will be a reflection of the things I've carved and the type of things I've chosen to carve. It'd be no different than, and certainly I wouldn't compare myself to any great artist, but it would be no different than what is Norman Rockwell remembered for? What is Remington remembered for? What is Picasso or Charles Russell remembered for? They're remembered for the styles of art that they chose to pursue because they liked those or for whatever reason. So the style of art that I have chosen is simple, maybe a little idealistic in some cases, Norman Rockwell-ish type of things perhaps, but it's just my sculpture is a reflection of the way I see things. So hopefully people remember it in a positive way. I've tried to do positive carvings. I wish I could say that I planned this all out to happen like this, but I didn't. I wish I was that smart. But I think there was a plan. It was more God's plan to bring joy to other people's lives through these carvings. I just happen to be the go-between, and that's from my perspective, things that I've seen and things that have come out. I wish I could take more credit for it, but that's what I've seen, and really that's not an opinion, that's more an observation. What God has done for people through some of these carvings. You know, all the people that I've gotten to meet and the very nice people that have allowed me to come in and do something in their tree, and I'd just like to thank everybody for, you know, having faith in me that I come in and do something nice, and I hope I have, and hope you've enjoyed them, and just thank all the people for letting me do that. That's it.
Thank you.